In just 39 seconds, one of Hollywood's biggest legends would unleash a verbal assault so fierce it would send shockwaves through live television. What started as friendly banter between Joy Behar and Harrison Ford quickly transformed into a blazing inferno of accusations, interruptions, and raw emotion that left studio audiences gasping and producers scrambling. The explosion was so intense that security had to step in. Cameras kept rolling, and by the end, one of cinema's most respected actors would storm off the set in absolute fury. The morning began like any other on The View's bustling New York set. Harrison Ford, promoting his latest film, settled into the familiar orange chair with his trademark half-smile. The studio buzzed with excitement as crew members adjusted lighting and sound levels. Ford looked relaxed, even charming, as he chatted quietly with the other hosts during commercial breaks. Joy Behar, never one to miss an opportunity for controversy, had clearly done her homework. She shuffled through her notes with that mischievous glint in her eye that regular viewers know all too well. "Welcome back to The View," Joy announced as the cameras rolled live across America. "We're here with the legendary Harrison Ford. And Harrison, I have to ask you something that's been on everyone's mind lately." The audience applauded warmly, but Ford's expression shifted slightly. Something in Joy's tone suggested this wasn't going to be the typical promotional interview he'd expected. "Sure, shoot," Ford replied, adjusting in his seat. His voice carried that familiar gruff charm, but there was a hint of wariness creeping in. Joy leaned forward with predatory focus. "Your recent comments about climate change have been pretty vocal. You've called people who don't believe in it idiots and dangerous. That's pretty harsh language for someone who flies around in private jets, don't you think?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Ford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "Well, Joy, I think the science is pretty clear on this issue. When you look at the overwhelming evidence from climate scientists worldwide." "But Harrison," Joy interrupted, her voice rising with theatrical indignation, "you literally own multiple planes. You've crashed 2 of them because of your reckless flying. How can you lecture regular Americans about their carbon footprint when you're burning more fuel in a weekend than most families use in a year?" The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the direction anyone had expected the interview to take. Ford's publicist, sitting just off camera, looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. The live audience fell silent, sensing the brewing storm. Ford's response came slowly, deliberately. "That's a fair point about personal responsibility, but I think you're missing the bigger picture here. Individual actions, while important, pale in comparison to corporate pollution and government policy failures." "Oh, so it's do as I say, not as I do?" Joy's voice dripped with sarcasm. "That's convenient for someone worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You can afford to be an environmentalist, while the rest of us deal with gas prices and energy costs." "Joy, I don't think you understand," Ford started, but she was already loading her next verbal ammunition. "No, Harrison, I think I understand perfectly. Hollywood elites like you love to preach from your ivory towers about how the rest of us should live while you zip around in your toys. It's hypocritical. And frankly, it's insulting to working families." Ford's composure began to crack. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, and his voice took on an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "You know what, Joy? I've been flying for 40 years. I've put my money where my mouth is, with conservation efforts, renewable energy investments, and supporting environmental organizations with both time and resources. What exactly have you done besides complain about gas prices?" The audience stirred uncomfortably. This was escalating fast, and everyone could feel it. Joy's eyes lit up like she'd just been handed the perfect weapon. "What have I done?" She laughed bitterly. "I don't own a fleet of planes that I crash into golf courses, for starters. I don't burn thousands of gallons of jet fuel for weekend joyrides, while telling soccer moms they need to buy electric cars they can't afford." Ford's face was reddening now, his famous cool beginning to evaporate. "Those accidents were investigated thoroughly. and they had nothing to do with recklessness. Engine failures happen, Joy, but I suppose you'd rather focus on tabloid drama than actual environmental policy. Engine failures? Joy's voice reached a new pitch. Harrison, you landed on a taxiway instead of a runway and nearly hit a passenger plane with over 100 people on board. That's not engine failure. That's pilot error. And you want to lecture people about being dangerous? The tension was becoming unbearable. Production assistants behind the cameras looked panicked, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue. Ford stood up slightly in his chair, his voice growing louder. You have no idea what you're talking about, Joy. The FAA cleared me completely, but I guess facts don't matter when you're trying to score cheap political points on live television. Facts? Joy shot back. The fact is, you're a privileged celebrity who thinks rules don't apply to him. Flying when you're not supposed to, crashing planes, and then having the nerve to call other people dangerous for questioning climate science. The hypocrisy is staggering. But what happened next would push this heated exchange into territory that neither host nor guest could return from, setting the stage for an explosive confrontation that would define both of their careers in ways neither could have imagined. Ford leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. You know what your problem is, Joy? You've spent so many years stirring up controversy for ratings that you've forgotten how to have an actual conversation. This isn't journalism, it's a damn circus, and you're the ringmaster. The studio fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop as Ford's words hung in the air like a lit fuse. Joy's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, then something that looked almost like satisfaction. She had pushed one of Hollywood's most respected actors to his breaking point on live television, and she knew it. Oh, so now I'm the problem? Joy's voice was ice cold now, more menacing than when she was shouting. Harrison, you came on my show. You knew exactly what this was when you agreed to be here. Don't blame me because you can't handle tough questions about your lifestyle choices. Ford's hands were shaking slightly. Whether from anger or adrenaline, nobody could tell. Tough questions? You call ambushing someone with tabloid gossip and personal attacks tough questions? This is exactly what's wrong with media today. No substance. Just gotcha moments and cheap shots. Cheap shots? Joy stood up from her chair, something she rarely did during interviews. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. Calling out hypocrisy isn't a cheap shot, Harrison. It's holding people accountable. You want to be a climate activist? Great. But don't expect a free pass just because you're Indiana Jones. The mention of his most famous character seemed to hit Ford like a physical blow. His eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice carried a venom that shocked everyone in the studio. Don't you dare bring my work into this. You want to talk about accountability, Joy? Let's talk about your accountability. How many times have you spread misinformation on this show? How many guests have you ambushed with your manufactured outrage? Joy's co-hosts looked like deer in headlights. Whoopi tried to interject with, maybe we should. But both Ford and Joy ignored her completely. This had become a two-person war zone, and everyone else was just collateral damage. Manufactured outrage? Joy laughed. But there was no humor in it. Harrison, everything I've said is true. You do own multiple planes. You did crash them. You do lecture people about climate change while living like you're above it all. If pointing out facts is manufactured outrage, then maybe the problem isn't me. Ford shot up from his chair so fast that his microphone pack nearly fell off. Facts? Here's a fact for you, Joy. I've donated millions to environmental causes. I've worked with scientists, policymakers, and activists for decades. I've put my reputation on the line to fight for issues that matter. And what do? You sit in this studio and tear people down for entertainment. You're not a journalist, you're a vulture. The audience gasped audibly. Some people covered their mouths in shock. This was beyond anything they had ever witnessed on daytime television. Joy's face went bright red, and for a moment, it looked like she might actually be speechless. But only for a moment. A vulture? Her voice was dangerously quiet again. Harrison, at least I'm honest about what I do. I don't pretend to be some environmental saint while burning jet fuel like it's going out of style. I don't crash planes and then act like the victim when people point it out. And I sure as hell don't come on talk shows and insult the hosts when they ask me to explain myself. Ford took a step toward Joy's desk, and immediately, two security guards who had been standing at the edges of the set moved closer. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ford's publicist was frantically making hand signals, trying to get him to sit down, but he was way past the point of no return. Explain myself? Ford's voice was getting louder again. To you? Joy? You couldn't explain your way out of a paper bag. This whole show is just you and your cronies, sitting around attacking people who actually try to make a difference in the world. You're parasites, feeding off other people's success and failures. That was the final straw. Joy's composure, which had been hanging by a thread, finally snapped completely. She slammed her hand on the desk so hard that her coffee mug jumped, spilling liquid across her notes. "Get the hell off my show!" she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You arrogant, hypocritical bastard! How dare you come in here and insult me on my own program?" The cameras kept rolling as chaos erupted around them. The other hosts looked terrified. Audience members were on their feet, some cheering, others looking horrified. Ford stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, staring down at Joy with pure contempt in his eyes. But the explosion that followed would make everything that had happened so far look like a gentle disagreement, as both celebrity and host crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. Ford's eyes blazed with fury as he leaned over Joy's desk, his voice dropping to a growl that sent chills through the studio. "You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right. I should get off your show. But not before I tell you exactly what I think about you and this pathetic excuse for television." The security guards tensed, ready to move. But Ford wasn't done. He straightened up, his full height towering over the seated host, and pointed directly at her face. "You sit here every day, tearing people down, spreading negativity, dividing people for your own entertainment. You're everything that's wrong with this country right now. You're a poison, Joy, and this show is your way of injecting that poison into millions of homes every single day." Joy shot up from her chair again, her face twisted with rage. "How dare you? How dare you stand there and lecture me about poison when you're the one who came in here acting like you're better than everyone else? You think your money and your fame make you untouchable? Well, guess what, Harrison Place? Not in my house." "Your house?" Ford laughed bitterly, gesturing wildly at the set around them. "This isn't your house, Joy. This is a corporate studio, owned by people who pay you to be controversial because that's all you're good for. You're not a journalist. You're not an entertainer. You're just a professional agitator who's forgotten the difference between holding people accountable and being a complete bitch." The audience erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Several people stood up, some heading for the exits, others pulling out their phones to record. The other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Producers were frantically shouting into their headsets, but nobody seemed to know whether to cut the feed or let this disaster continue to unfold. Joy's face went purple with rage. "Did you just call me a bitch on live television? Did this washed-up movie star just call me a bitch on my own show?" She turned to the cameras, her voice shaking with fury. "This is what happens when Hollywood elites don't get their way, folks. They throw tantrums and attack women who dare to challenge them." Ford's laugh was cold and humorless. "Attack women? Joy, I've worked with some of the strongest, most talented women in Hollywood for 50 years. I have nothing but respect for women. But you hide behind your gender when you can't defend your actions. That's not feminism. That's cowardice." "Cowardice?" Joy screamed, spit flying from her mouth. "You want to talk about cowardice? How about crashing planes because you're too old and stubborn to admit you shouldn't be flying anymore? How about lecturing people about the environment while you live like a king? How about coming on my show and throwing a tantrum when someone calls out your hypocrisy? Ford took another step closer, and this time the security guards moved in, positioning themselves between the two combatants. You know what's really hypocritical, Joy? You pretend to care about working families and regular people, but you make millions of dollars stirring up hatred and division. You're profiting off chaos. And you have the nerve to call me out for flying a plane? At least I don't endanger innocent people with my hobbies, Joy shot back, her voice hoarse from screaming. At least I don't pretend to be some environmental hero while I'm burning fossil fuels like there's no tomorrow. At least I don't walk into someone else's workplace and insult them when I don't like their questions. The head of security, a large man who had clearly dealt with situations like this before, stepped between them with his hands raised. Okay, that's enough. Mr. Ford, I'm going to need you to step back and calm down. Ford looked at the security guard, then back at Joy, his chest still heaving with anger. Don't worry, I'm done here. This whole place is toxic. He ripped off his microphone pack and threw it on the floor, the feedback screeching through the studio speakers. Good riddance, Joy yelled after him as he turned toward the exit. Don't let the door hit you on your way out, you arrogant piece of shit. Ford stopped dead in his tracks and slowly turned back around. The entire studio held its breath. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. You know what, Joy? In 30 years, when you're forgotten and this show is canceled, people will still be watching my movies. They'll still remember Han Solo and Indiana Jones. But you? You'll just be a footnote in television history. The host who was so desperate for ratings that she destroyed her own career on live television. With that, Ford strode toward the exit, his publicist and security detail scrambling to keep up with him. Behind him, Joy was still screaming obscenities, but he didn't turn around. The cameras followed him all the way to the studio door, capturing every step of his dramatic exit. As the heavy studio door slammed shut behind Harrison Ford, the sound echoed through the stunned silence like a gunshot. Joy stood alone at her desk, breathing heavily, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared. The other hosts stared at her in horror. The audience sat in shocked silence, and somewhere in the control room, producers were probably having nervous breakdowns. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In less than 20 minutes, one of Hollywood's most beloved actors and one of daytime television's most controversial hosts had engaged in a verbal warfare so brutal, so personal, so utterly devastating that it would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. What started as a simple promotional interview had exploded into a career-defining moment for both participants, and neither would ever be quite the same again.